Well, if you thought 25 bucks was a macro transaction, don't worry. Riot are here to make the definition a little bit more fitting. We got to talk about what people are billing as a $450 skin. At the very least, it is a skin that you can only get if you spend $450. Pretty rough. This is all being done, they say, to venerate their best players by recognizing them on the global stage. It's it's a little bit sus. We'll get into that, but there's another headline with Riot. It's one that led to them releasing a video, and it's basically them restating their position on player harassment in Valorant. It was sparked by somebody going way beyond what is like normal trash talk in a game. Pretty rough. Ultimately, Riot ended up saying, please play something else, we won't miss you, which is certainly bold and aggressive, but it's bad for their business when they end up having a whole bunch of community toxicity, because that pushes newer players away from the game, right? So yes, they probably want to fix that because it's a good thing to not have as a problem, but also it absolutely impacts their bottom line, because whenever there is a really big toxicity problem, guess what? You don't get new users. And we all know that's something that is particularly a feature of the humble MOBA. But first, look, we got to talk about the money. Okay, the Hall of Legends, it is a new initiative from Riot, and it is all about venerating the very best players in esports. This year, it's Faker. Of course, that makes a lot of sense. Faker is a genuine legend. I have played barely any League of Legends. I know about Faker just because he's an extremely famous player. And big picture, I think this is a pretty meaningful idea, right? Like actually doing proper content drops in and around people who are massive in your scene. I think that's really interesting. Of course, the role that they play in the esport is vital. Like for all of the community, it's something to rally around. So this is really nice to see. And in-game, the main way they're doing it is a battle pass that will give you event-specific skins and rewards, as well as in-game currency, and it's all themed around Faker. It costs $16. And that, I think, is completely, especially in a free-to-play game, I think that is completely fair and reasonable. Here's what they say. The event pass will take players on a journey through Faker's career, highlighting pivotal moments, achievements, and more. Players can earn and purchase commemorative cosmetic items, collections, and skins themed after the Demon King himself in celebration of the moment. And the way that this will work financially is that Faker and some other orgs will be getting 30% of the gross revenue, right? That's revenue, not profit. So that's probably going to be quite a meaningful amount of money. Not, of course, that the 30% will be a humongous dent for Riot, because they're still going to be making money in this, and I would say that the 30% will probably increase their sales because, well, fans will want to be supporting the people that they look up to. So for the most part, it seems fair and reasonable, a bit of win-win, right? But you don't make ungodly amounts of money on win-win. I mean, $16. What chump is playing for $16 when you can do collection bundles? And this is what has happened. There is the Risen Legend bundle for $40, the $250 Immortalized Legend, quite the jump in price, and then the $450 Signature Legend Edition. And you can basically see the slowly escalating content in each one of those tiers. So these are bundles with multiple things, but the thing that really matters is the big headline skin, and those are unique to the bundles, and they're only available for a limited time, and they never will return. Now, I'm not going to tire you by going through their whole post, but they basically frame it as this. For the casual fan, this is an amazing deal because of the Hall of Legends pass and all the things that it's got. And then the Risen Legend collection. Look, it has a new Risen Legend skin for this character. We haven't had that before. Isn't that amazing? And they say, for collectors to enjoy. For those looking to flex their fandom, hey, you want to flex your fandom? Well, we have a consumption opportunity. And then finally they say, while more expensive, these versions are meant to be highly commemorative, with never before implemented features that we cannot wait to see hit the Rift. Now, there is one thing where I suppose you have to be a little fair to Riot, where when they do a big premium skin, they are quite impressive. They really do go far in the quality of the animation, the voicing, like the total re-themes of a character's kit. That is good work. But still, at that price, it is fairly ghoulish. And by the way, the difference between the $250 and the $450 is basically that you do get the same Harry skin, yes, but the most expensive edition has a few little upgrades that are more Faker themed. So very much this is very expensive. And that is mostly the point here. That's mostly what people are a bit angry about. It's the sort of sheer absurdity of it all. In a way, it encapsulates a lot of the mentality that has happened around our industry, right? Like you look at, say, a new Overwatch season, and there's always some $40 or $50 bundle that, you know, if you add up the cost of the Overwatch coins and all of that, it's technically, plus 300% value. But it all just feels tiresome. It feels like nickel and diming. Here, when it's going that expensive, it's fairly ridiculous, especially because these are all digital things. Think about the amount of video games, or maybe even the amount of physical collector's edition video games that you could get for that amount of money. The streamer Loki summed it up well. Reminder that Faker doesn't use skins, so that's kind of funny, and Riot just made the Faker Harry skin cost $500. It's pretty shameful because this could have been a genuine celebration of the greatest player of all time, a way to honor the esport and League of Legends itself. And yeah, no, it's just going to be milking skin addicts. Absolutely. So I agree with that. The point, though, of course, is very clear with this. They want to make these top skins extremely desirable. And what they'll want to do is further and further and further the culture of skins such as that, right? That's the bit that's really important. Now, again, you sort of look at, and I suppose in my head, it is Zoomer culture. Maybe just a part of it is like America's, because the sort of the sneaker thing isn't really that big over here. But I do think about the limited sneaker drops. I do think about the flex culture as well. People are like, oh, I've got a Bell & Gacy, whatever, the Spanish fashion firm that just has stupidly expensive stuff. Like that kind of modern like flex culture. What they want to do is they want to bring that into their own game. And for Riot, the amazing thing about the expense is it becomes its own justification. It's expensive, therefore it's desirable. It's also rare, it's exclusive, and it's time limited. So it's doing all of those things, and it creates the culture. And that means that the next time they do this, someone will look at it and think, oh my god, I missed the last one, I couldn't get it. And then even if you feel uncomfortable, they just want to tip you over the edge. And once you've fallen over the edge, you've fallen over the edge and you are more likely to pay again. Because that's the thing. This isn't necessarily just about selling skins. Like, that's the overall gig, yes, but when you think about why is this time limited? Maybe you really like Algalon, and maybe you want Algalon for your Hearthstone Battlegrounds tavern dude. Can't get Algalon anymore. And that means that the next time they do one that you might like, you're going to feel a massive sense of, the fear of missing out. And then that creates the culture of spend. It creates the habit, and it trains the audience. So that ultimately is what Riot is doing. As far as I'm concerned, it's not like this is something that's game ruining or anything like that. It is just the sorts of things they do already, but inching it forward and forward and forward and forward. The top end in terms of price is going up and up and up and up. And for the rest of it, what it means is, sure, you might have a massive warehouse full of artists. Now, what are you going to do? Have them make tile sets? Have them make kits for levels? Have them make skins and things that you unlock normally through play? Or are you going to have them work on the thing that actually makes your revenue go up? And that ultimately is why we have so many games these days that, unlike games of the past, have fairly mid earnable in-game cosmetics. Because you see, that it wasn't just cosmetics for us back in the day. It was, look, the armor for my character looks cool because of the things I've done in the game. Basically, the more that this happens, the less it is like that. And that's bad, because one of those is just infinite consumerism. The other one is a player's experience. Now, on that topic of player experience, there is the other Riot story. This is a fairly serious one, so let's get into it. Now, on May 13th, there's a Valorant streamer, Taylor Morgan, who was subjected to harassment while playing Valorant over voice chat that was entirely gender-based. Now, it is interesting when you hear a situation like this and people will say, oh, it's just trash talk. People will trash talk you based on whatever is like your deviation from the average player. So if you have, maybe whatever accent, or you're from another part of the world, or you're a woman playing the game, a lot of people will just say, look, it's just trash talk. It doesn't really mean that much. So there's like a clear line between, I think, competitive trash talk and, just sort of talking shit with your mates. There's a clear line between that and then some other things. And some of those other things can be a lot worse. And while they can be very easy words for you to say, well, they can actually have quite an impact on somebody. So what happened is this streamer, she left the lobby, of course, got a penalty for being an early leaver. And the thing is, I feel like we could definitely increase the amount of people in the comments that would get this story if we just played the clip. The problem is, that would get this video age restricted, and then basically nobody would see it on YouTube. What I will say is, I'll just do two sort of anonymized quotes. Do you know what it feels like to be blank? It's a 4-letter word. Well, plus ED. Starts with R. I think you can understand what it is. The next one is, it isn't blank if I like it. And looking at the clip, like, that is, if you said that in a bar, the bouncers would remove you from the bar. If you said that in a lecture hall, you would be disciplined by your university. If you said that out in public, you could be seen to be harassing people, right? Now, a lot of people will then say, oh, it's a video game. You know the Tyler, the Creator thing about cyberbullying, just put your phone down? But the thing here is, well, what if you want to play Valorant and you're opting into Valorant, and then Valorant ends up being big old shit show? You're not going to enjoy Valorant. Now for Riot, that is obviously bad, because they want you to enjoy Valorant, because that's how they make money. And I suppose one of the things we end up talking about a lot in this channel is whenever incentives are or are not unified. And this is absolutely a case where the incentives, in this case for Taylor or anyone in a similar position, and Riot are incentivized. Yes, you could say on moral grounds, but also on financial grounds. Again, it's just like the problem with cheating that you see in a lot of like modern competitive games. Whenever PUBG was at the stage where you would just log into the game and maybe half the matches you would just have somebody aimbotting, right? That just meant that you didn't play the game. And that would be bad for PUBG's health. It's like that with cheating in a game like Valorant, which is why their tools are so robust for that. And it's also like that for harassment. And there are some fundamental, you could almost say philosophical things on this. So what is the space that you are operating within when you are playing a game like Valorant? You're using Riot's voice chat, playing their game, hosted on their servers. So it's the sort of thing where my house, my rules, right? Riot are absolutely within their rights. And even, say from my perspective, say I run a game and somebody sends me those clips and then it gets manually reviewed and it is found to look like, to be what it looks like. What would I do? I mean, I would just permanently ban the person, remove their license. That's it. And that's where it's quite obvious and clarifying. My house, my rules. That's not something you can say here. And the severity of it means you cannot come into this house anymore. Goodbye. And you may say, oh, but they bought skins in the game, or they bought a ticket to go into the house. Yeah, well, if you go into a theme park and you end up causing, let's say, some sort of big ruckus, you're going to be tossed out and not refunded because you messed up your end of the bargain. So Taylor, in this case, she basically tweets about this, and it is almost that like darkly funny. Like, it is kind of darkly funny that then she got the leavers penalty when that is why she left. Like, that is, to maybe a UK and Ireland sense of humor or an Australian sense of humor, that's darkly funny, in that like it's understandable because the system obviously is penalizing leavers. But I suppose it's a bit like whenever people describe something as Kafkaesque and it's like, oh my god, the system is failing / being inefficient at so many different levels. So Riot responded to this, and what I want you to think about here is this is a matter of public policy and governance. Like, that's fundamentally what this is. Yes, it's not government, but it is governance of Riot's space by Riot, right? And what policies they implement and how they choose to enforce them. And that is the sort of thing that is highly relevant to games. So overall, what would typically happen in a case like this is, maybe people would have a 72-hour suspension or something like that. To many people, it just doesn't feel like a watertight space. So, in response to this, we got a developer update, okay? This is from Riot Supercakes, who is also called Anna Donlan. She is the studio head, basically, of Valorant. In the 8-minute video, she basically highlights, like, policy, process, and also some of the underlying philosophy here, which I think is the important bit. She's talking about, protecting players, not protecting player counts, respecting the fact that muting somebody does not fix the problem. It just means that the victim doesn't get to play the game properly. So let's just do do some quotes from her. When you tell someone just mute comms to avoid harassment, you are essentially putting a harassed person in a position to not communicate, to compromise how they want to play the game, to accommodate you, right? So it's basically a thing here of really rights and responsibilities. And if you are logging into a game, I think you do have, not a right as is, enshrined in a big document of law, but you very much have, a good faith belief or expectation that whenever you do that, it will be an environment where other users are also playing by whatever the community guidelines are, whatever the terms of use for the service are, right? You've got a pretty reasonable expectation that that is what's going to happen when you log in. So if you basically just say, turn off your comms, number one, it does violate what a reasonable expectation for somebody would be, and it basically ends up prioritizing the rule breaker over the person who the rules are being broken against. Now, of course, where a lot of this gets challenging is what's reasonable? What is an interpretation of the, of the license agreement? What is it? People are going to have different, different ideas on that. And ultimately, that's why we kind of need the equivalent of case law, but basically Riot making clear enforcement decisions, us having a clear pattern of their enforcement decisions, and that then meaning that we know what Riot actually thinks. Because obviously it's one thing to have rules and a code of conduct, it's another thing to actually enforce that in an even-handed and fair way. Now, one of the criticisms that I think is pretty fair that you can get is like, okay, so you're just going to sanitize absolutely everything, what if it's funny, the word F-bomb makes my skin crawl because it's late enough in the video. Here we just say fuck. I've actually just about never heard non-Americans say F-bomb, so we're far more used to that over here. But even that's actually a really good example. There's a certain 4-letter word that begins with C. Here, very normal word. Australia, extremely normal word. You say that in parts of the States, people will be very, very, very angry and offended. And that's just a really good example of cultural norms in different places having variance, meaning that different people look at, a set of 4 words or 4 letters and they take away completely different levels of severity. That's why it's hard to do this stuff at scale. Now, Donlin has no time for the false equivalency between banter between friends and targeted harassment based on protected characteristics. She says that she loves banter and shit talk, but that's not what she's talking about here. So that, that 4-letter word beginning with R, obviously that can happen to, to anyone, right? To anyone, not just not just women, right? In this case, though, you look at, how those communications are happening. You look at how targeted they are. And, you sort of think about the ultimate power dynamic thing. And the thing there is, a lot of men fundamentally don't, I think, understand what it is like to at least be under the belief that in a fight, half the population, or, a large percentage of half the population will just be able to get you because they're bigger and they're heavier. I suppose some of it is that, walk a few miles in someone else's shoe thing. You kind of can't unless it's, some wacky episode where you wake up in someone else's skin. It's one of those things, not maybe, I think there's almost certainly people, who will use that in a targeted way at somebody without necessarily understanding how that person is going to take it. And now in this case, it very much did look like the person did understand how it was being taken, and because of that, chose to double down and be more personalized. And it is personalized. She responded, "Oh, so are you saying you want to me?" And the person on voice comm says, "Oh, it's not that if I enjoy it." So that is vastly transcending the realm of banter and trash talk. Myself, I'm very pro banter, very pro trash talk. The amount of shite that we talk to each other when we're playing World of Warcraft, or heaven forbid, back in the days playing Halo. I could get into some dicey territory, but there's a difference between that with friends and it being targeted at somebody. And that's ultimately why Donlin says there's no room in our community for the most egregious behaviors, and we're not going to compromise on that point. If you need to make truly evil statements under the guise of regular shit talk to enjoy gaming, please play something else, we won't miss you. And the thing there is, there's pretty much no developer or someone running any form of like a live game where they have an expectation to be guaranteeing a customer experience and providing customer support, there is no real dev who will be like okay with that. Now, ultimately, she says she understands that like you can't just stop this. You can't just like click a button and suddenly the people who are going to be discriminatory on the basis of protected characteristics, right? You can't just make that go away. But her view of the data is that when somebody steps too far and they're actively punished, usually they actually find that they don't repeat offend because they realize they've made a mistake. And that is a very big thing. A lot of the time there is this culture of double down, double down. Oh, you're caught out, double down, go harder. The big thing to do is to actually own your L. Like if you want to talk about this in like a sort of a male context, the person who's continually puffing up their chest, trying to look big, they just end up looking like a bit of a windbag and nobody really respects them. Whereas if somebody is willing to take an L, you know what? You end up respecting that person. And if that's borne out by their data, that's actually a pretty nice thing to hear, because it does run counter to maybe some of what people would experience online. Anyway, she says that the tiny minority are the repeat offenders. But of course, because they're doing lots of repeating, they're very visible. So they've basically decided to up their goals for community management, up to and including hardware bans for offenders. But the important bit is following manual reviews. One thing in a lot of different games, I remember this happening a lot with World of Warcraft, is whenever people don't like somebody and they just mass report them, fires off some automated system, and now you've been temporarily suspended from a game, even though you haven't done anything. That's something, I know it's done in drama with WoW, it's done with maybe people who play a game visibly online, on Twitch, and just all of that stuff. That's bad, and there ultimately does need to be some form of like human manual reviewing. Now, I'd say that should be done by somebody with genuine skin in the game who works for Riot, that Riot pays like a reasonable, proper Riot salary. Not the sort of thing where, as OpenAI did, you just find a content labeling company, say in Africa, and you just have people look at images of gore and stuff like that, for classifying sensitive material in order to better train their models. Like, that is something that happens, right? Do we want this sort of work? No. Riot should be doing it themselves. Don't throw it away to some other country where you're paying people like $1 a day just to look at the worst shit. So if Riot truly mean what they say here, they'll do it themselves, and they won't do it in a sort of morally bankrupt, cheapskate way. And this is what brings me to the final thing here. So, in a way, you could absolutely say that this is a very mercenary decision from Riot. The situation with Taylor Morgan, that happened to somebody who is public, who is streaming, right? So, number one, it's public. Number two, that specific case of harassment, and like I would personally qualify that as harassment, absolutely, given that it is repeated, targeted, personal. It is a conversation. It's not just throwing stuff. It's really bad. Like, it is an amazing example of the problem at its worst that Riot could have, right? So obviously, you can say, yeah, that's very mercenary. Because this has been happening. What happens if it just happens to, if it happens to you, if it happens to someone else, who doesn't stream? It's like whenever maybe a tech reviewer or something like that, they say they've had a problem with something in Twitter, and suddenly the brand arrives and fixes the situation. And then you're left wondering, I think this happened with, say, the Jenny Nicholson thing, with some Disney stuff. But then she's left wondering, okay, well, I didn't get screwed over because I have like 100,000 people on Twitter, so Disney obviously noticed and knew it would be a PR hit. But what happens if you don't have that? And you don't get through normal customer support, right? So it's the thing where if you were to criticize Riot, you'd say, well, this has probably been happening for years and years. We're only talking about it now because there happened to be a very public incident that turned into a public relations nightmare that then, of course, was transitioned into a public relations opportunity. Never waste a crisis. This was a great PR opportunity. They were able to signal their principles, say, oh, these are all the things, we don't want these, we're gonna have robust policies and makes everybody feel good. And then you're like, oh, well, a bad thing happened, but isn't that great that Riot have it under control? Obviously, Riot themselves have got a pretty sketchy history. There's a twist to this. And the twist is, does that mean that the people working on Valorant don't care about this? that this isn't something that they, like, genuinely they might think about, on their conscience, because by being internal in the company, they probably are exposed. They probably do see the bad things that are going on. No, it doesn't invalidate that. It's that thing where two things can be true. Yes, number one, this is a good example of not wasting a crisis and making an opportunity of it by a company that stands to profit from this sort of thing being resolved. Anna says, yeah, it's about protecting players, not player counts. Well, obviously, if you want your player counts to stay stable, you're going to protect your players. The incentives are extremely clear, but that doesn't take away from how, on the personal level, many of these people will actually give a shit. So, that's basically the situation there. The most basic version of my take in this is your house, your rules. If somebody breaks the rules, they get tossed out of the house. It's the way it works. This is not a story about censorship. It's not a story about political leanings or anything like that. It's like, oh, you broke the rules, go away. Now, if you ended up in a situation, obviously, where the application of rules was not applied properly, where, oh, some of these people are actually breaking the rules, but they get to stay in the house, whereas if these people break the rules, they're shot out of the house. Well, that's where you have a problem. And that is where policy is important. Your governance, your policy, those are important. But at the end of the day, execution is absolutely everything. So what we have got to see is how this will be executed by Riot. And if they will hit their goals in an even and fair way that actually makes Valorant a more healthy community. So, like, at the end of the day, how many games do people just not jump into because they're a little bit spooked? They don't want to be flamed because they're new and just beginning, they're just learning. It's a hell of a lot of games, actually. We see this feedback all the time across the industry. So, yeah, it's something they'll want to fix. Anyway, that's it for this story. Let me know what you think. I'll see you next time.